Before we get on with the podcast, I'd like to mention that I now have 3 books for sale on Kindle. Recommended Reading for the True Conservative, Bad Democrat, and now Evil Liberal. All available for $3.99 or through Kindle Unlimited. Now, on with the podcast.
When my grandmother died, totally shocked us because, well, first of all, she'd never done that before. She'd never done that before. It's like the first time ever. She lived to be 101 years old. 2 days after her 101st birthday, she woke up and she told her nurse, she said, "Today's the day I'm going to die." It's like she knew it. She put on her favorite outfit. She went to the cafeteria. She had her favorite breakfast, came back to her bedroom, and sure enough, blew her brains out with a .357 Magnum. How did she know? Do you know what I'm saying? How did people know that kind of stuff?
Good morning. It's Friday, Fight Song Friday, June the 3rd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and fight song. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
Now you can forget about that talk of a rate hike at the end of the year, which was the prevailing narrative right now, because now we got to go back to worrying about the labor market. We actually might now be getting a cut.
We're not remaining bullish, Stuart, just to be stubborn and bullish. We really believe it. America's the best country on the planet. We have the best companies, period. So stay invested here.
This is a providential opportunity to bring the country together under a shared sense of American patriotism. That's what all of these celebrations are about.
When these soccer fans have arrived on these shores, they see, hey, the media was lying to us. Actually, America is a fantastic place, and the people are lovely. And I think, for once, the truth is sort of filtered past the gatekeepers of the media.
When you hear communism, that's when people get scared. I don't think the Democrats are panicking. I really don't. I think they're going to view this as a means to an end to retake the House and possibly the Senate.
a temperature of 103
yeah.
in New York, maybe in the next couple of days. It's 93 now, and it's still going up. It could hit 100 degrees today, and it really is hot out there.
Oh, it's crazy hot. I just walked in here from the street. I was so happy to get in the studio.
You're schwitzing, as we would say in New York.
The problem with New York is it's so humid, it feels like 120
Yeah.
when it's 100.
It does feel tough, all right. 11 o'clock Eastern. It's Thursday, July the 2nd. On the markets, we've got a solid rally for the Dow. It's up 470 points. But I notice the Nasdaq has now slipped to the southbound lane, so to speak. It's off 51 points. How about big tech? I think it's a mixed picture this morning. Apple, Amazon, Microsoft up. Alphabet, Nvidia, down. Bitcoin, 61,000 last time we checked. It's 61.6 right now. That's pretty good for the crypto plays. All of them higher except Mara Holdings and Riot Blockchain. Strategy, up 8%. Now this. The election of socialist activists in New York and Colorado has lit a fire under the Democrats. Oh, they were shocked and stunned at first, but they're now beginning to understand the challenge they face. Look at this in the Washington Post. No more appeasement. Democrats need to fight the DSA. That's the Democrat Socialists of America. The Post says it's not a faction to be appeased. The DSA is a movement to be opposed. And you better move fast, because there will be a socialist summit later this month in Chicago. The DSA is running that show. The summit is their national organizing conference. They're going to offer skills training for organizers, along with political education for campaigns. In other words, their 100,000 members are indeed seizing the moment. It is their moment. But you know, they may just blow it. The DSA is getting carried away with its own success. The summit will call for the abolition of the carceral forces of the capitalist state, whatever that is. They'll want to draft the new constitution, eliminate the Supreme Court as we know it. As the Post says, that is electoral poison, guaranteed to lose elections. So pound them with ads pointing to their craziest ideas, why don't you? And run those ads against every Democrat in every race. Again, why don't you do that? Writing in the Wall Street Journal, Democrat Congressman Tom Suozzi says Americans don't want endless cultural wars. He's right. So make sure everyone knows what the DSA is all about. Let them go down the rabbit hole of defund the police and open the border. Right now, it's up to the moderates to fight back against the socialists. So get on with it. You lose to the DSA, and you've lost your party. Third hour of Varney starts now.
And that was Stuart Varney. Nonprofit News Now. Back in a minute. Thank you. This internalized self-doubt reshapes the conservatives' identity. They begin to think small, speak less, fear conflict, and seek permission. They lose their natural confidence, their spontaneity, their spark, and they don't even realize it's happening. That's the genius of bad Democrat manipulation. It convinces the victim that the destruction is their own fault. The bad Democrat never has to raise their voice. They simply have to raise a question and let the conservative do the rest. Walking away is not cruelty, it's moral clarity. That distinction is essential to understand because the conservative, conditioned to equate respect with sacrifice, often interprets the act of leaving as an act of harm. They're deeply attuned to the image it presents, but that confusion, the belief that protecting yourself is somehow unjust, is the very distortion that keeps them trapped. The truth is, walking away from a bad Democrat isn't an act of aggression. It's a refusal to participate in a lie. The conservative has spent months, sometimes years, trying to fix what isn't broken in themselves. They've tried to explain, to compromise, to empathize even further with someone who never reciprocates. They've rewritten their values, swallowed their voice, minimized their hurt, all in the hope that this would inspire respect. But the bad Democrat doesn't see that as respectable. They see it as weakness. In their mind, your willingness to endure mistreatment proves that you deserve it. The more you stay, the less they respect you. The more you give, the less they value what is given. And so the conservative begins to diminish. Not all at once, but in a slow erosion. A chipping away of self-respect, of energy, of dignity. Each manipulation, each lie, each cold silence or calculated guilt trip drives another crack into the impasse core. They begin to see themselves not as worthy of respect, but as flawed, difficult, even broken. They internalize the bad Democrats' projections. They try harder to please, harder to adapt. They apologize for things that were never their fault, and in doing so, they move farther away from their authentic self. But something happens eventually. Not always loudly, not in a moment of drama. Sometimes it comes quietly in the stillness of yet another sleepless night. It's a realization not of anger, but of clarity. The conservative sees the pattern. They realize they've been trying to build a bridge to someone who never intended to meet them halfway. And with that realization comes a shift from shame to recognition, from guilt to truth. They see that staying is no longer compassionate, it's self-abandonment. This is where moral clarity begins. It is the understanding that you are not obligated to destroy yourself to preserve someone else's comfort. That respect, real respect, does not require the erosion of identity. It does not demand silence in the face of cruelty or submission in the face of control. The conservative begins to see that the very act they've been avoiding is not a betrayal of respect, but an expression of it, not toward the bad Democrat, but toward themselves. This moral clarity is not about revenge. It's not about proving a point or making the bad Democrats suffer. That's not the conservative's nature. It's about no longer participating in a dynamic that thrives on distortion. It's about refusing to mirror back the bad Democrat fantasy, the fantasy that they are untouchable, righteous, superior. When the conservative walks away, they are no longer validating the narrative. They are no longer standing in the role of the bad Democrat assigned them, the caretaker, the scapegoat, the emotional sponge. They simply exit the stage. The bad Democrat, of course, will claim this is cruelty, not because it truly is, but because it disrupts their control. In their worldview, others exist to serve their needs. When someone refuses, it's seen as betrayal. They will accuse the conservative of being selfish, ungrateful, cold. They may rage or sulk or plead, anything to regain control, but the reaction is not evidence of your wrongdoing. It is evidence of their dependence on your compliance. Walking away doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop enabling. It means you recognize that staying in a toxic dynamic doesn't garner cooperation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Maria Bartiromo.
As this report from the Financial Times that OpenAI has proposed government take a 5% stake in the company. That would be valued at about $40 billion, a 5% ownership stake. Apparently, CEO Sam Altman reportedly raised the idea in conversation with President Trump and senior officials. And the concept is to ensure that Americans have a stake in the wealth created by AI in the face of all this pushback from the Bernie Sanders of the world. They don't want the data center build out. They want a moratorium on it.
Okay, so what I like about this idea is, again, instead of just saying no to the left, Bernie Sanders of the world, no, coming up with a counter proposal is much more constructive. It's much better for the morale of your people, and most importantly, it allows you to take control of the narrative. If all you're doing is saying no, the left is always going to maintain control of the narrative, and you end up losing. You inevitably lose. Take control of the narrative, and if that means you got to come up with some ideas that sound kind of far-fetched, the government owning pieces of companies, so be it. It doesn't mean that it's going to come to fruition. It doesn't mean that the government will actually own pieces of companies, but you make the proposal so as to, again, control the narrative. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, motivation.
You say you want it, but you don't want it. You say you want it, but you don't really want it, because if you want it and you're willing to pay the price for it, you can have it. When you start training, train like it's your life, not a game. Like this the last opportunity, the only opportunity. But if you don't go out there and give 120%, you're not a man. You can't dictate what kind of game you're going to have. You can't dictate how your body is going to respond to moving around. But you can always give 120 on your effort. Some of us are getting punched every day, then we quitting. Some of us are getting punched and we stop. Oh, I'm going to feel depressed. I'm going through it. Stay focused. Stay focused on the goal. We gonna execute forever and ever and ever. You just get up every day and stay focused. Don't focus on success. Don't focus on money. Focus on the standard. The standard will get you to success. And the standard is we execute every day. We grind every day. We work on it every day. You're putting in the work. And just because you can't see the results, you want to quit or give up. If you keep going, you're gonna break through. The only people that don't break through are the people who scoreboard watching. You got to get after it now. It's on you after today. Ain't no more excuses after today. Ain't no more wiggle room after today. You got to get after it. So we're going to make a commitment moving forward. It's called focus. And nobody can't do it for you. So if you're going to get focused, that's something you're going to have to practice on your own. That's something you're going to have to decide that means something to you. That's something that you're going to have to say is important to me. And you got to make a commitment after today that we're not losing no more, and we're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot. Anybody ready to make that commitment to yourself? Are you ready as a man? You say you're going to do something. Is anybody ready to start and finish exactly what they said they're going to do? You don't care what the scoreboard is. You don't play to the score. You play to the standard. The score doesn't matter. So if you're winning and then you shift and you change and you let your guard down, then you're playing to the score. Roquan Smith plays to the standard. Ray Lewis plays to the standard. Kobe Bryant plays to the standard. That's why they are who they are. Set the standard, then raise the standard, then uphold the standard every single day. Now, some of you that's too much. Well, you're not going to be a champion. The real beast is the last 4 minutes. The real beast is when their legs give out. The real beast when they tired. The real beast find a way to pull something out when nobody else ain't got nothing. Yep, it's tough. It's hard. I'm not telling you it's going to be easy to grind. I'm not telling you it's going to be easy, but I can tell you this. It will be worth the sacrifice if you can grind your way through it. No excuses, just adjustments. So if I come in here, I'm giving everything. And some of you want to give everything when you win it. You want to give everything when things are going well. That ain't manhood. Manhood is I show up, and I show up my best every time I show up, or I don't show up, period. Ain't got nothing to do with no money. I don't care what your record is. You start and you finish. That's Kobe. That's Jordan. And that's what made them them. They wasn't scoreboard watching. They was legacy watching. They got my name on it. They got film of me. Jordan said, if you got film on me, it's going to be the best. Kobe said, if you got film on me, I'm always going to show up my best. Well, this day 4, I need you to show up your best. I don't care what the score is. From this day forward, you start strong, you finish strong, or don't come at all.
And that was motivating. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, meditation at 432 hertz. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Law and Order.
Well, you got to admire her creativity.
Shambhala Grace, queen of the specious motion.
She's representing her client with the zealousness required by the canons. And I'm sure she thinks we should have exhibited a little more of it in prosecuting Joshua Berger.
You can't compare what Joshua Berger did with what Isaac Roberts did.
Of course not. Suppose this crazy motion actually works. A judge buys Green's argument.
Would you drag an innocent man out of a car and bash his brains in?
You know, I don't know how I'd react if I'd been screwed by the system my whole life.
Okay, there it is. The two DAs, or assistant DAs, Ben Stone and I forget what her name is, having a conversation about a motion or an appeal, actually, is what it's going to be, by a defense attorney. What was interesting is the way that the lady attorney approached this. They're sitting there in the law library. They got the little banker's lights on, and they're looking through the books, and they're going to write up their doing their research, let's say. So, and then she comes out of nowhere with her non-statement. If you listen to it carefully, she really doesn't say anything. You got to admire her creativity, and what she's doing is she's baiting ADA Stone, and then he responds, and then she comes back with more baiting him again, and eventually baited him a third time with well, I don't know what I would do if I were, if I'd been screwed by the system my whole life. All of it is baiting. She fails to make a point. What Ben Stone should have done is when she says, well, you got to admire her creativity, is say something along the lines or ask the question, who are you talking about? Make her explain herself. Make her prove her point. First of all, she has to make a point, because in that whole conversation, she never bothered to make a point as to whether or not the defense attorney was right or wrong in filing the motion, and whether or not the district attorney's office was right and or wrong in what it is that they were doing. And this is the way that the left operates. The liberals love to do this. You got to listen carefully. If they're not making a point, don't make the point for them. Don't guess. Make them do the work. My motto is, if they're going to beat me, then they have to earn it. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Ukraine.
Ukraine has unleashed a three-pronged attack, hitting Russian oil refineries, weapons factories, road and rail bridges as its 40-day surge gains pace. But Russia has hit back with a devastating strike on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. And U.S. officials have reportedly warned Poland that Russia is planning a major provocation within the next few months. My name is Jerome Starkey. I'm the defense editor at The Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. We're starting with Ukraine's long-range strikes, and I'm going to break them down into three categories. Strikes on oil refineries, strikes on the military-industrial complex, the weapons factories, and strikes on Russia's logistics and infrastructure. We'll start with oil. On the 28th of June, just after our last update, the Slavyansk oil refinery, some 250 miles inside Russian territory, was hit in Krasnodar Krai. A couple of days later, the 30th of June, the Ufa oil refinery, some 800 miles inside Russian-controlled territory, was hit. And then just days after that, the Kostovo refinery, or rather, and this is going to be a little bit hard to pronounce, the Lukoil Nizhgorodneft e Iognitses refinery in Kostovo was hit. That's some 500 miles inside Russian territory. That's a trio of oil refineries. On the industrial side, weapons factories. On the 27th of June, the Titan Barakadi plant in Volgograd was hit, reportedly by a barrage of Flamingo missiles. 3 days after that, the Penza missile plant, or rather the Penza plant, the JSC NIFI Research Institute, which produces components for missile launchers, was hit. And days after that, on the 3rd of July, the Belgorod Energy Factory, known as Energomash, which makes equipment for Russian power plants, power stations, was hit in Belgorod. That's just north of Kharkiv province. And whilst all of that was happening, reports of at least a dozen electricity substations hit in occupied Crimea. So that's slightly different targeting. We've had the weapons plants, two weapons plants, or plants that make parts for weapons hit, a factory that makes parts for the energy infrastructure, and of course then the substations themselves in Crimea. That could come under logistics. If we move now on to logistics, the roads and the railway bridges. On the 30th of June, a bridge connecting the occupied cities of Donetsk to Mariupol, a bridge was hit, a road bridge was hit, and then later a rail bridge over the Tepla River in Luhansk, slightly further north. On the 2nd of July, Ukrainian drones struck a warehouse believed to be storing Russian drones in Kamyanka in occupied Zaporizhia province. And throughout this week, we've seen fuel trucks being hit in Crimea. Ukrainian forces also released a battle damage assessment on July 1st, which referred to a strike that took place earlier. That was against Russian space communications plant near Belumut in Moscow Oblast. That assessment suggesting that space communications center suffered serious damage to antenna and indeed to the headquarters building. There are, of course, still strikes and against the Russian military, sort of pure military targets on the front line. The SBU, Ukraine's domestic intelligence service, has reportedly hit a number of aircraft in two separate strikes in occupied Crimea. They initially said they'd hit two aircraft shelters and a fire had ignited in one of them, suggesting damage to a Sukhoi jet. But in their latest update today, they say they've hit at least 7 aircraft, damaged or destroyed some 7 aircraft, not specific about which ones, but also likely to be Sukhoi jets and bombers. Those 7 at the Saki airfield in Crimea. They also say they've hit the Guards airfield, which was being used to launch Russian drones. The impact of these strikes, well, on the oil refineries, we continue to see fuel shortages, evidence of fuel shortages and rationing inside Russia. We learn that in different ways. Dramatic drone footage I've seen today of just the scale of one of the queues outside a Russian gas station. Also comedy footage appearing to show ingenious Russians coming up with ways to circumvent the fuel shortages by filling up multiple tanks inside a car. A report in The Economist has suggested that Ukraine has hit 70 air defense systems this year alone and has reduced traffic on that land bridge from Mariupol to the top of occupied Crimea by some 70%. So that's indicative of the scale and the consistency of these strikes and how every strike, every day, every week has a cumulative effect. Life is getting harder for ordinary people in Crimea. Crimea is not yet totally choked, but the logistics in and out of that occupied peninsula are getting significantly harder, and that's because the land bridge to the top is being cut, and that's because the ferries, road and rail infrastructure, both at the top and at the east near the Kerch Bridge, have also been targeted. But of course the Kerch Bridge remains standing. standing. In the other direction, this week, Russia has fired some 1,371 missiles and drones back at Ukraine. It's been a big week of Russian attacks. You remember last week we talked about how there would only be 900 drone and missile strikes. That's a strange phrase, only 900. But based on the sort of patterns, that was a low number, and we warned that when there are fewer strikes, that normally means that Russia is marshalling its resources for a big strike. And we saw that big strike come overnight from the 1st to the 2nd of July, where Russia fired 496 long-range drones, 74 missiles. They hit 28 sites in the capital, Kyiv. At least 30 people have been killed and more than 90 injured. President Zelensky's first takeaway was that if Ukraine's allies had met their commitments to supply the Patriot missiles they have promised, then fewer people would have been killed, more sites would have been saved. If we look at the breakdown of those strikes, it's quite interesting. Of the 496 drones, Ukraine says it shot down 476. So just 20 of those got through. 4 Zircon missiles, these are hypersonic anti-ship missiles, were fired. All 4 got through. Those are some of the hardest to shoot down. Those are the missiles that Ukraine would most need Patriots for. 24 Iskander or S-400 missiles, repurposed S-400s fired. Only 4 of those were shot down. So again, those missiles proving particularly difficult for Ukraine. There were also 34 KH-101s. 32 of those were shot down. That's a much better strike rate. 8 Calibers. These are ship or submarine-launched cruise missiles. All 8 of those were shot down. And 4 KH-59 or 69 missiles, all 4 of those shot down. So from that, the takeaway is that overall, all those weapons together are designed to try and overwhelm Ukraine's air defenses. Just 20 of almost 500 drones got through, but all of the Zircon hypersonic missiles got through, and 20 out of 24 of those Iskanders. That's why Ukraine needs those most sophisticated air defense missiles that America and American allies can supply. Interestingly, the head of Ukraine's Air Force has been talking about changes to Russia's drone tactics, suggesting that Moscow is using increasing numbers of jet-powered drones. This makes them fly faster, makes them harder to shoot down. It's likely a response to the proliferation of Ukrainian interceptor drones. Ukraine developed these interceptor drones to shoot down the low, slow-flying Shaheds. Originally, Shahed drones were propeller-powered. They were noisy, they were slow, cheap interceptors that could launch vertically and autonomously, could shoot them down, and they've been very successful. Russia has responded by flying drones faster and higher out of that range. And as those drones get faster, they behave more like cruise missiles. In fact, there's a very blurred line between where a fast jet-powered drone becomes a cruise missile, and that requires Ukraine to field more sophisticated, expensive, and scarcer air defense systems to shoot them down. We've also seen hit this week at the port in Odessa, a shopping centre, and a swimming pool in Zaporizhia. CCTV from inside that sports centre showing people swimming in the water as the building was struck. In the close battle, Russia continues to try and advance. There have been advances they've been rather attacking but not advancing in Sumy. Ukrainian forces have been reportedly doing clearing operations in Kozacha Lapan, that's north of Kharkiv, very close to the border with Belgorod, after reports that Russian soldiers had infiltrated. Some claims that the soldiers had infiltrated that village, disguising themselves as civilians. They've also been attacking north of Kupiansk and around Sloviansk at the top of the fortress belt. However, an analysis by Roshan Consulting, who've been watching this conflict very closely over the course of since the start of the full-scale invasion, suggesting that Russia has actually lost more territory than it gained during June, lost some 40 square kilometers, and their analysis puts that largely down to territorial losses in the sort of Liman-Sloviansk axis. They have, however, made gains in Konstantinivka, that's the town at the southern end of the fortress belt, where Russian forces are fighting their way through the urban built-up area, but facing fierce resistance and paying a huge price in lives. There are three stories I want to look at today on the political front on what's been happening outside Ukraine. The first is that warning I mentioned in the introduction that US officials have reportedly warned the Polish government that Russia is planning a major provocation that could take place in the next weeks or months. Now, this was originally reported in a Polish news website, Onet, by a journalist called Witold Juras. Now, he is a former Polish diplomat, author of a number of books, widely seen as a very credible, serious journalist. Multiple sources suggesting that these warnings, that several warnings have been delivered to Polish authorities by their US counterparts, suggesting that this provocation could take various forms. It could be a drone incursion, it could be a drone strike against critical infrastructure, it could be troops crossing the border. For example, soldiers coming to try and secure the site of something like a helicopter crash. It could be Russian forces out of Kaliningrad. It could be Belarusian forces or even Russian forces out of Belarus, which shares a neighbor with Poland. The suggestion is the objective of this provocation would be twofold. One, to escalate tensions, but secondly, to deter allies, Ukraine's allies, from continuing their support to Ukraine, and likely to try and seed fractures or divisions within NATO over how to respond. Reports in the Polish newspaper Onet and the Daily Telegraph, its sister newspaper with the same owner here in the UK, suggesting that Russia would then try and negotiate an end to this crisis rather than face a hot conflict with Poland. And if they could end it with a negotiation, they would see that as a victory. Donald Tusk, Poland's prime minister, has responded to these reports, suggesting that the next few months are going to be critical. He said he didn't want to scare anyone, but the next few months are going to be critical. And he also talked about not just the risk to Poland, but a risk to the Baltic states. And all of this comes in the build-up to the next NATO summit. The second thing on the political front, a report by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, based here in London and published this week, has said that the Kremlin, it was highly likely that drone incidents across Europe were part of a Kremlin campaign that saw shadow fleet vessels launching and recovering military-grade drones which were surveilling nuclear sites, military bases and critical national infrastructure across 12 NATO countries and Ireland, including the United Kingdom. Drones were sighted over RAF Lakenheath, Mildenhall, Feltwell and Fairford. Lakenheath and Fairford in Gloucestershire both host US aircraft capable of carrying nuclear weapons. They also flew over the, I think it was the Klein-Brogel base in Belgium, which hosts US nuclear weapons, Elon in France, the French nuclear base, and of course over the French and British flagship aircraft carriers, the French nuclear-powered Charles de Gaulle and the British HMS Queen Elizabeth. The third political story has been the shift in policy in Finland and Lithuania, their willingness to host nuclear weapons. Finland voted last month to change the law to allow it to host nuclear weapons, and Lithuania appears to be going in that direction. This is a reflection of the fears, the concerns these nations face on Russia's frontier over possible incursions. Dmitry Medvedev, president of Russia's Security Council, a former stand-in president for Putin and indeed a very pro-Putin blowhard, has said that all this changes is it now puts Finland, because that's the only country that's confirmed it so far, it puts Finland on Russia's nuclear targeting list. So that has been his response, escalating that nuclear rhetoric. Thank you, as ever, for your questions. If you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments below. As I always say, they make me think, they make me laugh. We love to see them. We do try and respond, and we answer as many as we can. There's three I'm going to get through today. Question number one, lasers. There was lots of talk about lasers some months ago. Where are they? It's a really good question. We haven't seen confirmed examples of lasers on the Ukrainian battlefield. There had been great hopes that directed energy weapons, concentrated beams of light, might be a magic bullet to defeat the drone threat. Lasers can be very quick, and they never run out of ammunition. They are being developed by a number of countries, and if you're interested, we've done an arms race episode specifically on lasers. We haven't seen them in Ukraine. That's likely a combination of a couple of things. The technological difficulties of fielding them, of manufacturing them, and indeed the risk, the vulnerabilities that they may face if they are fielded. These weapons, as far as we know, are largely still in trials. Question number 2, what happened to the North Koreans? It's a good question. In 2024, in August 2024, some 10 or 11,000 North Korean soldiers deployed from North Korea to Russia's Kursk Oblast to help Russia repel an incursion by Ukrainian forces. We understand that the last of those forces went home back to North Korea around December 2025, so about 16 months later, and some 2,300 of them were killed. There had also been reports of some North Koreans appearing in Donetsk, possibly as part of a liaison or training mission to try and understand the conflict and the context that their soldiers were deploying into. The deployment came after two key elements to it. Russia and Pyongyang, Moscow and Pyongyang, had signed an agreement, so a mutual defense pact. And so the justification for sending those forces to sovereign Russia was that Ukraine had advanced into sovereign Russian soil, and those North Koreans were defending sovereign Russian soil. Once Ukrainian forces were pushed back, that threat no longer existed. The reason for North Korean soldiers to be there no longer existed. Third question. Why doesn't Ukraine target Russia's Rosgvardia? That's the National Guard. The question is saying because that would panic Putin. It's a good question. The National Guard in Russia is really the successor to the Soviet-era internal armed forces. They play a role in suppressing riots, dissent, protest. They're more than the you might think of as a National Guard. Why isn't Ukraine targeting them? Well, the other thing I should mention, of course, they're run by one of President Putin's former bodyguards, Viktor Zolotov, 72, so a similar sort of age to Putin as well. Why isn't Ukraine targeting them? If I were to speculate, I would say it's because Ukraine has limited resources and there are more important targets. It doesn't necessarily want to instill panic in President Putin. It wants to understand a sort of cold, hard realization that Russia is collapsing from the rear. That is the objective of these deep, long-range strikes, hitting the oil industry, hitting the industrial base, hitting Russia's logistics, choking the military logistics lines. In the sort of ancient art of war fashion, Ukraine is not fighting Russia where it's strongest, which might be on the front lines, where it's so willing to sacrifice its soldiers' lives. It is fighting Russia where Ukraine has the advantage, and at the moment, that seems to be in the deep.
And that was Ukraine. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.